All right, buckle up, because today we're peeling back the layers on one of history's most fascinating intellectual pivots. Imagine a mind that brought us Sherlock Holmes, right? A master of logic and deduction. Now, picture that same brilliant mind grappling with ghosts, spirits, and the very nature of the afterlife. We're diving into a stack of writings by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, specifically his works The New Revelation and The Vital Message.
Yeah.
These are definitely not detective stories, though they involve well, a tremendous amount of investigation into the unseen.
Indeed. And our mission here is to explore Doyle's deeply personal and actually surprisingly systematic case for spiritualism. He presented it not just as a series of, strange phenomena, but as what he genuinely believed was a crucial new religious revelation for humanity. We'll trace his path from a staunch materialist to a profound believer, uncovering the evidence he found so compelling. And we'll examine his truly provocative views on how this new understanding could, reshape traditional religion.
Yeah, you're going to hear about everything. From tables seemingly moving on their own in unsettling poltergeists, to what Doyle considered scientific experiments with ectoplasm, that's a mysterious substance said to be exuded by mediums, and even spirit photography. And we'll discover how a terrible global conflict, World War I, changed everything for Doyle. It shifted his focus from just the phenomena, the sort of how does this work, to the profound spiritual meaning he believed was being delivered to mankind. It's quite a wild ride. So let's start at the beginning of this extraordinary journey with Arthur Conan Doyle's personal transformation. After finishing his medical education in 1882, he was, like many young doctors of his time, a self-proclaimed convinced materialist when it came to personal destiny. For him, death was the absolute end. Just like a candle burning out, the body dissolved, and that was it. Nothing more.
That's absolutely right. His initial stance on anything spiritual was one of complete skepticism, total disbelief. He dismissed it as, and I quote, the greatest nonsense on earth, pointing to, fraudulent mediums and wondering how anyone sane could even entertain such beliefs. He was coming from a place of very strong, almost unshakable materialism.
But then, around 1886, 1887, his worldview started to crack a little. He had his first experiences with what were called table-moving seances with friends, the classic setup. A group sitting around a table waiting for it to move or tap out messages seemingly on its own. And he started getting these surprisingly coherent messages spelled out by table tilts. His initial reaction, though, was suspicion. Total suspicion. He thought his friends were consciously moving the table, and frankly, they probably suspected him too. But he was genuinely puzzled because these were people he trusted, people he couldn't imagine cheating. Yet the messages seemed impossible without some kind of conscious pressure. Or so he thought.
Exactly. And this growing puzzlement, this sort of internal conflict, led him to some truly pivotal encounters. He read the reminiscences of Judge Edmonds, a U.S. High Court judge who claimed to be in regular contact with his deceased wife. Doyle initially just dismissed this. He attributed it to a weak side to his brain, arguing that the spirit was dependent on matter. For example, a skull injury could change a person's character. Or alcohol could alter their spirit, suggesting the spirit was inseparable from the physical brain. That was his initial take. But later, he had this kind of aha moment, reflecting that, tampering with a violinist's instrument doesn't disprove the musician's existence, does it? It just means the instrument is faulty.
Oh, okay.
So the medium, or the brain, was the instrument, not the source itself. That became his revised view.
That's a really powerful analogy. And he had another significant conversation too, didn't he? With General Drayson.
Yes. General Drayson, who was a pioneer of spiritualism, he addressed Doyle's, frankly, disgust with some of the seemingly foolish or trivial messages coming through from spirits. Drayson explained it by comparing a mixed seance to, like, a man putting his head out a window in a rough neighborhood. You're going to encounter naughty boys, not necessarily philosophers, right?
Makes sense.
He stressed that spirits arrive in the afterlife exactly as they were in life, with all their imperfections, so one must seek higher ones, just as you'd choose your companions in this world. It made Doyle realize that the quality of the messages really depended on the quality of the channel and the intent of the communicators.
What's truly striking, though, is how major scientific figures of his era influenced him. That must have shaken his materialism. People like Alfred Russel Wallace, Darwin's co-discoverer of natural selection, no less, Sir William Crookes, a leading British chemist, and Camille Flammarion, the renowned French astronomer. All of them believed strongly in spirit independence. Doyle couldn't simply dismiss this as just some vulgar delusion when it was endorsed by such respected minds.
Precisely. And he contrasted their openness with the, frankly, unscientific derision of figures like Darwin, Huxley, Tyndall, and Herbert Spencer. They outright refused to even examine the evidence. Can you believe it?
Really? Just refused.
Yeah. Spencer, in fact, declared against it on a priori grounds, meaning without any investigation at all, purely based on his pre-existing philosophical assumptions. This made Doyle realize that maybe the weak spot might actually be in his own brain and his own preconceived notions, not necessarily in the claims of spiritualism. A real moment of intellectual humility for him.
So this intellectual shift was definitely underway, realizing that his own preconceptions might be the limitation. But it wasn't like a sudden conversion, was it? He still had moments of doubt, setbacks.
Exactly right. That intellectual humility was crucial. But yeah, even then, as we see with the Slat and Mirror incident around 1896, he was still very much wrestling with the evidence. During a seance, a spirit claiming to be a commercial traveler lost in an Exeter theater fire gave exact details and implored them to write to his family in Slat and Mirror, Cumberland. Doyle did it. He wrote the letter. But it came back through the dead letter office. He admitted this disgusted him, made his interest wane for a time. He felt like the subject was playing elaborate practical jokes on him. Yet the fact he still pondered it years later, even wondering if there was maybe a simple mistake in the address, shows how deeply it had actually taken root in his mind.
But the truly pivotal shift, the one that changed absolutely everything for him, was World War I. Faced with just unimaginable widespread death and immense grief, he himself lost family members, didn't he?
He did, several close relatives.
Doyle realized that spiritualism was no longer just a scientific curiosity to be debated in drawing rooms. It was something tremendous, as he put it, a breaking down of the walls between two worlds, something offering hope and guidance to a deeply afflicted human race.
Exactly. The physical phenomena, which he had spent years investigating, suddenly became, in his words, mere telephone bells, signaling a vital message from beyond. The objective side of it ceased to interest, he wrote, for having made up one's mind that it was true, there was an end of the matter. The meaning became paramount, not just the mechanics.
So if these phenomena were truly spirits, how did Doyle and others move beyond just anecdotes to what they considered solid scientific conviction? What was their evidential basis for this belief?
Well, it really boiled down to rigorous testing and cumulative evidence, not just isolated incidents. One of the strongest forms of proof for them was what they called cross-correspondences. Have you heard of these?
Vaguely, but explain it.
Okay, so this involved multiple mediums, often in completely different locations, like one in India, another in England, say. They would independently receive related yet indirect messages that only made sense when you pieced them together. For example, in one experiment focusing on St. Paul, the simple words St. Paul weren't given directly. That would be too easy, maybe. Instead, spirits apparently made various indirect allusions to St. Paul, and even gave 5 separate quotations from his writings, scattered among different mediums unknown to each other.
Wow.
This pointed, they argued, to an outside intelligence orchestrating these complex, fragmented messages, something beyond coincidence or simple telepathy between the living.
That's fascinating. So the specificity of the messages was what truly convinced him. Can you give us an example that really stands out in its verifiable detail? Something the medium or sitter definitely couldn't have known.
Absolutely. We see this pattern repeatedly in his writings. Take the case of Captain James Burton. A week after his father's funeral, his hand was apparently controlled, writing at an amazing rate, producing this microscopic script. Yes. And this automatic writing revealed a sacred secret known only to his parents concerning something that happened years before he was even born. When Burton told his mother, she apparently fainted and then accepted the communication as genuinely from her late husband.
Incredible.
Another striking example involves a Mr. Ernest Oughton and a spirit surgeon named Mill. Through a direct voice medium, Mill supposedly whistled his favorite Il Trovatore tune and referenced a private quick-step test. This was a tune only Mill's father would recognize, played on a piccolo, and it had deep personal meaning, completely unknown to the medium or Oughton. These kinds of specific personal details made fraud or telepathy seem extremely improbable to Doyle. Doyle himself even tested a medium named Mrs. B's clairvoyance. He thought of his brother-in-law, an army doctor, who had a specific spade guinea coin. The medium correctly mentioned a young officer holding up a gold coin for recognition.
Right.
And in another instance, a boy apparently reminded his mother of having sown turnip seed on the lawn, a tiny detail only he and his mother could have known.
So beyond just these incredibly specific messages, Doyle also documented physical manifestations, right? What were the different forms he observed? Let's start with automatic writing. What made that so compelling beyond the content?
Well, automatic writing was often compelling because the hand would sometimes write upside down or even in languages completely unknown to the medium, like Greek from a young daughter or medieval French from another child, the content entirely outside the medium's normal knowledge or education.
Okay.
Then there was direct voice. This is where voices distinct from the medium's would be heard, even when the medium's mouth was covered, or, get this, filled with water, as observed with a medium named Mrs. French.
Filled with water. Wow.
Yes. And in one famous case he cites, a dead man's dog was apparently so excited at hearing his master's voice again that it broke its chain trying to reach him.
And what about spirit photography? That sounds like something straight out of, well, a ghost story, doesn't it?
It certainly does, but for Doyle and others, it was another form of physical proof, or what they considered proof. Images of the dead would apparently appear on photographic plates, sometimes differing from any living pictures that existed, or they'd show images of deceased family members, like a dead soldier son appearing between his two living brothers on a photo. The Crew Circle was particularly known for this. Professor Henslow, a respected botanist, even tested it. He got a copy of a passage from the ancient Codex Alexandrinus in the British Museum to appear on a sealed photographic plate he had provided himself. Or so the story goes.
Okay, and then we have the phenomenon of ectoplasm. That's a term you definitely don't hear every day. What exactly is that supposed to be?
Right, ectoplasm. As documented by researchers like Dr. Gailey through experiments, it was described as a whitish, sometimes dough-like substance, exuded by mediums, apparently forming into detailed human features or even full forms.
Like physically materializing.
That was the claim. It was theorized as a new form of matter and energy, highly sensitive to light, often dissolving quickly on exposure. This phenomenon, though rare, provided a kind of physical, tangible basis for materialization for believers, suggesting spirits could, under certain specific conditions, interact directly with our physical world, forming temporary bodies.
And then there are those more unsettling, almost primal phenomena like poltergeists. Doyle even investigated a case himself, didn't he?
He did, yes. The Cheriton dugout case. It involved classic poltergeist phenomena, mysterious noises, flying objects like stones and bricks, all occurring in this old 14th century house. Doyle's suggestion to dig in a certain spot actually revealed buried child bones.
No way.
Yes, and he linked these disturbances to the unspent vitality of those whose lives were cut short tragically. A fascinating, if grim, connection between the physical haunting and a spiritual explanation.
So with all this evidence he was gathering, were there any challenges or common objections that Doyle had to acknowledge? Even as a staunch believer, he must have faced skepticism.
Oh, absolutely, and he was quite forthright about them, which adds to his credibility in a way. Doyle openly admitted the existence of fraudulent mediums. He wasn't naive about that, but he argued this doesn't invalidate genuine cases, just like, the presence of counterfeit currency doesn't mean all money is fake.
Right.
He noted that figures like D.D. Home, for example, were rigorously scrutinized over decades and never caught cheating, often performing in broad daylight. Another challenge was the apparent limitations of spirits themselves. They often had difficulty conveying names clearly. Their time estimates were notoriously inaccurate. Doyle noted something like, Earth time is probably a different idea to spirit time, which is interesting. And they sometimes preferred indirect communication, or circumlocution, as he called it, supposedly to make humans use their own brains and discern meaning. Lastly, he acknowledged what he called wicked or mischievous intelligences, spirits who would lie or play elaborate practical jokes. However, Doyle noted that in his extensive experience, he never observed truly blasphemous or obscene messages. He believed these backward brothers, as he termed them, needed pity and prayer rather than fear.
That's a crucial distinction. So, given all this, what does this new revelation about spiritualism mean for our understanding of spirituality and traditional religion, especially Christianity? Doyle's conclusions were quite radical, weren't they?
They were indeed very radical for the time. Doyle's core assertion was that spiritualism is religion, the very essence of it. He believed it wasn't a new religion itself, but rather a unifying force, providing provable things connected with every religion. It offered a common, solid basis, empirical, he thought, upon which all faiths could potentially build, reconciling reason and faith.
And he believed Christianity, in particular, needed two needful readjustments. Discarding the Old Testament sounds like a huge step. What was his reasoning for such a radical proposal, specifically from his spiritualist perspective?
Well, he argued quite strongly that the Old Testament promotes a tribal God filled with, in his view, rage, jealousy, and revenge, inspiring murderous impulses. He'd quote passages like "Smite and spare not," and saw it as a historical record, yes, but a taint that poisoned the very spring of religious thought.
A taint. Strong word.
Very. He argued it should be removed from the sacred book entirely, as incompatible with the loving, progressive God revealed through spiritual communication.
And what was his second readjustment?
His second proposed readjustment was a re-emphasis on Christ's life over death. Doyle felt traditional Christianity placed undue importance on Christ's death. Martyrdom, while significant, is common to many religions and founders, he pointed out. He believed the true grandeur and lesson lay in Christ's consistent record of charity, breadth of mind, unselfishness, courage, reason, and progressiveness. A unique and superhuman life that taught humanity how to live, not just how to die. The example was key.
And from the perspective of spirit guides, Doyle also believed in what he called a Christ spirit. How was this figure described in the communications he received?
This was described, consistently he claimed, as the highest spirit associated with Earth. Not God Almighty, but representing God. His special care is Earth, and he came to give the lesson of an ideal life. Crucially, in this view presented by the spirits, there's no atonement or redemption in the traditional theological sense. Instead, it's presented as a perfectly feasible and reasonable scheme for human development and spiritual progression through living a good life and learning.
So this new understanding, Doyle argued, allowed for a remarkable reinterpretation of New Testament events through the lens of psychic law. Can you give us some examples of how he saw Christ's miracles fitting into this framework?
Absolutely. Christ's working of miracles, things like healing the sick, levitations, maybe even feeding the multitudes, these were seen not as supernatural exceptions breaking laws, but as extensions of natural law within psychic powers. Powers that could be developed by advanced spiritual beings or perhaps even latent in humanity. Even Christ's groaning before raising Lazarus was reinterpreted quite specifically as parallel to a medium groaning or showing physical strain to manifest power. Doyle saw a direct parallel to how mediums in his time might groan or exert effort to bring forth phenomena.
That's a very specific connection he's drawing.
Yeah.
What about the gifts of the disciples? Did he link those two?
He did. St. Paul's famous list of the disciples, gifts, prophecy, healing, working miracles, discerning spirits, speaking in tongues. Doyle described that as essentially the list of gifts of a very powerful medium. He speculated that perhaps Christ's followers were chosen, in part, for their inherent psychic abilities, forming a kind of psychic calling practice could be seen as a survival, perhaps, of transferring thaumaturgic power, a kind of miracle working or healing ability. He compared it to how the medium D.D. Holmes supposedly shared his inexplicable fire immunity with others briefly. And even Christ's famous act of writing in the sand when questioned about the sinful woman. Doyle saw that possibly as an act of automatic writing, accessing pre-human knowledge beyond normal human experience to resolve the situation.
So for Doyle, the result of all this reinterpretation was a Christianity that could finally be reconciled with science and observe phenomena, offering spiritual peace and lifting the, as he called it, nightmare of doctrines like eternal hell. It sounds like a deeply comforting vision he was constructing. Okay, so moving beyond the religious implications, what about the other side itself? What did this new revelation tell them about what actually happens after death? Was there a consistent picture emerging from all these various sources Doyle studied?
Yes, strikingly so. From countless independent sources, seances, automatic writings, clairvoyant descriptions, a remarkably consistent and detailed picture emerges. The transition itself, death, is almost universally described as a painless and natural process. The lighter spirit body simply disengages from the physical body. It maintains its identity, mind, emotions, and crucially, a perfect, non-mutilated form. For instance, he cites a soldier saying, "I have got my left arm again."
Wow, that's powerful.
The spirit body then stands or floats beside the old physical body, fully conscious of its surroundings. There's often an initial period in what's called a refreshment place, which sounds like sleep or semi-consciousness. The length varies. One spirit named Raymond reported 6 days, another Myers, a much longer period. It's seen as a necessary rest before taking up duties in the new life.
Once they've had that rest, what's life actually like in the spirit world as due to these accounts?
It's consistently described as exceedingly happy, with absolutely no desire to return to Earth, interestingly. Spirits experience reunion with loved ones and friends. The principle seems to be like goes to like, meaning those of similar spiritual development or vibration naturally gravitate toward each other.
So community is important there too.
Very much so. And life is full of congenial work, interests, and occupation, definitely not eternal idleness on a cloud. The world itself is described as very much like that which they have quitted, but everything keyed to a higher octave. More refined, more beautiful. There's a strong emphasis on continuous intellectual, artistic, musical, and spiritual development. Learning never stops. Crucially, there's no physical pain and no distinctions like rich or poor. Children who pass over apparently grow to normal adulthood, and age or deformities from earthly life disappear. Everyone is in their prime, essentially.
What about relationships?
There's no gross sexuality or childbirth according to the messages, but there is a close union between loving married couples who wish to remain together and deep sympathetic friendship between the sexes. Spirits are often described as wearing flowing robes that somehow reflect their spiritual condition or attainment. Visions of old earthly clothing are just temporary pictures created for recognition by those still on Earth.
That sounds incredibly comforting, especially for people grieving. But what about the more traditional, darker concepts of punishment or hell? How does this new understanding address those fears?
Well, according to Doyle's synthesis of the messages, hell, as commonly understood in traditional theology, drops out altogether. It simply doesn't exist as a place of eternal torment.
Really? Completely gone?
Completely gone. Instead, there is what's described as purifying chastisement or purgatory. Not punishment for punishment's sake, but remedial. Lower spheres exist for grosser souls or the undeveloped soul, but these aren't permanent prisons. They are places where individuals are helped to progress by higher, more evolved spirits. As one spirit communicator, Miss Julia Ames, memorably put it, the greatest joy of heaven is emptying hell.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Isn't it? The sin of conventionality, just going through the motions without real feeling, and sluggish spirituality are described as common reasons for souls lingering in these lower spheres, these spiritual hospitals, unable to appreciate the higher levels of happiness immediately. It's not eternal damnation, but a path of progression and loving assistance.
So the vital message then, coming through consistently, is that the departed all agree that passing is usually both easy and painless, and followed by an enormous reaction of peace and ease. That must have been profoundly reassuring for Doyle, especially after the horrors of the war.
It truly was. You can feel the relief in his writing, and the practical implications of believing this knowledge are profound, he argued. It offers utter fearlessness of death, which is huge, and immense consolation when those who are dear to us pass behind the veil. More broadly, Doyle argued it fosters the greatest reinforcement of morality. By instilling a sure sense of responsibility for our own spiritual development, knowing that our actions and character truly define our experience in the next phase of existence. It's not about escaping punishment, but about becoming better.
Doyle's deep dive into spiritualism, then, wasn't just some fascinating side project or eccentricity. For him, it was nothing less than a refoundation of faith on tangible evidence, as he saw it. He really believed this new revelation was destined to revolutionize human thought and action. It's a remarkable, almost unbelievable transformation for the creator of Sherlock Holmes, the ultimate rationalist.
Indeed. He genuinely saw it as providing the firmest basis upon which religion has ever stood, moving from what he considered blind faith to actual experience and fact. The profound consensus among independent witnesses across decades and continents, coupled with the verifiable phenomena he documented, it made the existence of a continuous life and the possibility of communication an undeniable reality for him and, well, for many others of his time.
And for you, the listener, what does this extraordinary personal journey of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the wealth of detailed accounts he presented provoke? Does it challenge your current beliefs about life, death, consciousness? Does it maybe offer a new lens through which to view faith, life, and what might lie beyond?
It certainly raises an important question. If, as Doyle argued, this knowledge has been rediscovered rather than newly created, how might embracing it, even considering it with careful scrutiny and an open mind, alter our own sense of purpose and the way we navigate this life? It certainly reshapes the concept of an ending, doesn't it?
A profound and truly open-ended question to carry with you. Join us next time on The Deep Dive, as we continue to explore the depths of fascinating subjects, one source at a time.